Welcome to the D3 Datacast. We got our first weekend of Division 3 men's basketball games. Awesome to be back. Let's get into our week 2 show, Matt, talking about week 1.
Excited to see games. Zach, we talked about Friday and Saturday games in the car on the way home from Bloomington, Illinois. So we're going to cut to a little bit of audio only version, but we'll be right back with the live version of the show after that. So stay tuned, catch the whole thing, everyone. We'll see you on the other side.
Coming to you from the road. We're making our way back from Illinois Wesleyan University, where we spent the weekend seeing 4 great teams in action in person at the 2024 Sigma Hall of Fame Invitational. And Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm trying not to crash the D3 Datacast bus as I drive here and record a podcast at the same time. So let's see how this goes.
A lot of fun to get out on the road. We always love a D3 Hoops road trip. Let's start, Matt, with a few thanks and some acknowledgments here, starting with Katie Gonzalez at Illinois Wesleyan, the assistant AD for athletic communications. Thanks to her for access and being a great host there. Matt, also thanks to Eric and Matt on the IWU broadcast. Always can count on a great broadcast out of Illinois Wesleyan. They do a great job, and our thanks to them for having us as guests on the halftime of the Calvin Wisconsin Platteville game. A lot of fun to join them. Thanks for them. And I think we got a little bit of a broadcast jinx we need to maybe acknowledge there, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, we do need to call them out. Our understanding is in the final minute or two of that Calvin Platteville game, as things were going a little bit downhill for Calvin, they started to talk ahead to Saturday's matchup between the host Illinois Wesleyan Titans and our Calvin Knights. And as we know, or we'll talk about in a little bit, Calvin ended up losing that game on a buzzer beater.
Also, huge thanks and shout out to Jack Sikma, of course, the namesake of the tournament, and Dr. Bob Spear, the tournament sponsor, a pair of teammates at Illinois Wesleyan. And we were really honored to get the opportunity to play them in some euchre after the Saturday night games. Thanks to Ed Moore, the gracious host, another one of their teammates from those great Illinois Wesleyan teams in the 70s, and Bob Quillman, who I think deserves some credit or some thanks for helping orchestrate getting, just a couple random D3 Hoops Twitter guys who started a silly little podcast into, sort of the inner circle there. We had a great time. We were very honored that they brought us in and accepted us and showed us a good time there, playing a little cards after the tournament concluded.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for Bob Quillman for kind of hosting us for this weekend at Illinois Wesleyan, showing us around, having lunch with us, and Dr. Bob Spear and Jack Sikma for being gracious euchre opponents.
And thanks, too, for our Patreon supporters. It's fun to be able to get on the road and having some backers who back us financially. It helps us to do that and get to see some of these great teams in person. So thanks to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/D3Datacast for more information on what that's all about and how you could consider supporting us financially. All right, so let's move on, Matt. As we said, we're driving home here Sunday, decompressing the weekend. We saw the great 4 teams in action. Did a lot of scoreboard watching outside of that. So we want to just take a little bit of a rundown, kind of assess the picture, the landscape, if we could, from the limited view that we get just from the opening weekend. Of course, the opening weekend's not even complete here. We've got Sunday games that will be pending as the time that we're having this discussion. But let's just start with Friday, starting at the top of the top 25. Matt, number 1, Trine gets a win over Mary Hardin Baylor. Maybe not notable just for the result, but when you look at the margin, it kind of is eye-popping. Trine gets a 98-70 win over Mary Hardin Baylor.
Yeah, always interesting to see what the defending national champions will do right away on opening weekend. And I think this was definitely a take care of business moment for Trine. Mary Hardin Baylor comes up from Texas to the Trine Classic here. And, Trine really puts the hammer down and puts themselves right on the map as title contenders again for another year.
It was a little bit different story on opening night for number 2, Platteville. They get the 82-81 improbable comeback buzzer beater win over number 9, Calvin. It was a real back and forth affair that really throughout felt like a game befitting of a top 10 matchup that it was.
Yeah, and really kind of an odd first half, second half in this game. I think the first half ended with both teams tied at, what was it, 28, Zach?
I believe 28, yeah.
And All-American Logan Pearson hardly played in the first half because of foul trouble. And then in the second half, things flipped. Both teams scored more than 50 points. Calvin found themselves up by 11 with, about a minute and a half to play, somewhere in that range. And then kind of everything started going right for Platteville. Calvin, who had shot free throws well all game long, kind of split some trips to the line, going 1 for 1. And Logan Pearson was able to get to the rack. He was able to make some shots. Some calls went Platteville's way. A key block call toward the end, and a jump ball that gave Platteville a couple of extra shots at the basket there, and they took advantage. And then with 3 seconds left, Logan Pearson found himself at the line for 2 shots, and he actually misses them both, and then gets a tipped rebound to chuck back up at the basket, kind of a shot put shot, and it bounces off the rim twice and then falls at the buzzer. And that's how Calvin loses by 1 point against UW Platteville on opening night.
Another Wisconsin team of note in the top 25, Matt, not a WIAC team, but Wisconsin Lutheran. They started their season ranked number 15, hosting what a lot of people think could be one of the contenders in the CCIW, or at least, in that top group in the CCIW, Elmhurst. A lot of times you might see a matchup like this and think the CCIW team is the ranked team, but it was Wisconsin Lutheran ranked 15 coming into the season, Elmhurst unranked. Wisconsin Lutheran gets an 84-74 win, kind of validating that preseason ranking.
Yeah, they were the team, as you said, getting a lot of love in the preseason poll, rightfully so. They have a lot of players returning from NCAA tournament squad last year, and this was a game we had potentially on our upset watch as maybe Wisconsin Lutheran getting beaten by a recent CIW power in Elmhurst. But Wisconsin Lutheran really takes care of business here and gets the scoring margin up where you'd like to see it for a team that's up in the middle of the poll at, a 10-point final margin thereabouts. So a really nice look for Wisconsin Lutheran on opening night, and they're definitely a team to keep an eye on going forward.
The other game at the Sigma Invite was actually the first game of the day, with number 16 Illinois Wesleyan getting a 93-81 win over number 24 Cal Lutheran.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this game is the 12-point margin, I don't think was really indicative of how this game played out through the course of it. I think Illinois Wesleyan was up by maybe about 20 at one point, and Cal Lu was able to reel them in a little bit toward the end to cut it to about 12. But yeah, Illinois Wesleyan looked strong all weekend. This opening night win was impressive for sure, but we also didn't know exactly what Cal Lutheran was. So we're also waiting for Saturday results to validate it. But right out from opening night, Illinois Wesleyan was impressive. They looked big, they looked athletic, and they have a lot of options that they were able to throw at the opponent. Guys off the bench who can contribute at similar levels to their starters. So we'll talk a little bit more about their Saturday result as well. But Illinois Wesleyan had a great weekend, and it started out with this convincing win over Cal Lutheran.
Number 18, Carnegie Mellon, brings a lot back this season. They start the season hosting La Roche, but it was just a 66-64 win for Carnegie Mellon. That was, they get the win, but maybe not the score that a lot of people would have expected.
Yeah, a ranked team from the UAA like Carnegie Mellon, you expect them to beat La Roche, and you kind of expect them to beat La Roche fairly comfortably. Although we do know La Roche is a team that was young last year. I think they've returned a lot this year, and they're a team that's always feisty. Hermie Carmichael has his teams ready to play. They're not scared of playing a top-notch non-conference opponent, even a game they might lose. It's a game that prepares them. It's a game that they always get up for. But yeah, it's a scoring margin that's notable. Even if you expected Carnegie Mellon to win, to quote-unquote only win by 2 is maybe a surprise. So we have to see if that is, portends better things for La Roche this year. If that is Carnegie Mellon still trying to figure out what's the difference between last year's squad and this year's squad. So just kind of a result that we maybe raised an eyebrow at as we were watching scores come through, and maybe one just to keep an eye on what it means for both squads going forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to characterize it, because I think you could say a lot of the same things about this next one, trying to figure out like what are these teams going to be. Matt, that was one of the first games of the day, a noon game in Alliance, Ohio. Mount Union hosting Yeshiva. It was Yeshiva getting an 86-81 win over the 19th ranked Purple Raiders.
Yeah, Yeshiva has a lot of good pieces coming back from last year. I think their backcourt is quite strong. Hopefully they have a healthy Or Sanjevsky this year. But they were also getting some maybe interesting transfer pieces into the program. Players like Luke Cronin, I think, started this game. So it was an impressive win for Yeshiva at Mount Union. Mount Union's a program I had voted rather high in my poll. And so it's a result like this where you don't quite know. We're still waiting for Yeshiva's Sunday game. You don't quite know, was this maybe not a great look for Mount Union, or was it just that impressive for Yeshiva? Is Yeshiva a team that we need to start really seriously considering as a team maybe back on the national map?
Another top 20 team to drop a home game on opening night or opening day, Matt Hope, ranked number 20 coming into the season, dropping an 80-78 decision to Anderson.
Yeah, definitely another one of those that makes you raise an eyebrow. Anderson was a team who was in the NCAA tournament last year. They played Hope in the NCAA tournament, and Hope won that game handily. And then Anderson loses a bunch of players transferring up to Division II or maybe transferring to other Division IIIs. And to win at Hope like that is impressive for Anderson. Now, I think we do also understand that maybe the Flying Dutchmen were a little bit shorthanded. I think Marcus Werman maybe went out of that game with an injury. I think their another starter, Parker Hovey, maybe didn't play, I think, due to illness, if I remember what I saw. Yep. So maybe the Flying Dutchmen were shorthanded, but still, they would have obviously loved to get a win against Anderson on opening night. And that's a game that's going to we're going to have to maybe take a second look at Hope and say, are they really going to be one of these top 25 teams right now?
And then rounding out the top 25 picture on opening day there, Matt, some other games that we just kind of characterized as taking care of business, or not maybe as notable as some of those other games. You know, Wash U gets a 22-point win over Rhodes, 75-73. Randolph-Macon opens with a 79-66 win over Salisbury. A game that was in our picks, Trinity, Texas gets a 99-82 win over Bethany Lutheran. Number 17, Guilford, an 85-72 winner over Pfeiffer. And that takes care of top 25 action for Friday. All right, moving on to Saturday. Number 1, Trine was again back in action against in-state non-conference competition Wabash. They get the 78-68 win. It goes in as a 10-point win, but it took a little bit of a comeback from the Thunder.
Yeah, a game, as we were watching the scores flow through, halftime updates, this was a game that Wabash had led for a little while. It was a game that was back and forth, but Trine ultimately has enough to pull away and make it a comfortable margin at the end. So what you expect to see out of the number 1 team in the country, Wabash did give them a test. I think we expect Wabash to hopefully be in the mix in the NCAC this year. But at the end of the day, yeah, the Thunder had too much and have too much, and had themselves a nice weekend at home. They're starting at the top of the poll.
Number 2, Platteville dropped the SICMA Invitational Championship game to number 16, Illinois Wesleyan. That was an 86-66 game that, Matt, as impressive as Illinois Wesleyan was Friday night, I think they were even more impressive Saturday. The 20-point margin was fitting. I think it was, even bigger than that through much of the second half. The Titans look great. I don't know. I think my biggest takeaway is the Titans look really good. I know expectations were high, but maybe some questions about, what's it all going to look like. I think what we saw this weekend is that, take however you picture, okay, if this goes right for the Titans, what does it look like? And I feel like that's what we saw this weekend.
Yeah, Illinois Wesleyan has a lot of players that fit really well in their role, and they create matchup problems for the opponent all up and down the lineup. And even in this Platteville game, a couple of starters had 2 fouls right away. I think Wilmson went on the bench with 2 fouls, and Nick Roper went on the bench with 2 fouls, and that brings guys off the bench.
And Marco Anderson was great coming in for Wilmson.
Yeah, he played tough in the middle, and they didn't lose too much. Yeah, these are great players going to sit on the bench, but their next wave is good. Everyone is locked into their role. Illinois Wesleyan looked great. This was maybe the most impressive result of the weekend. Definitely the ones that we saw. There's no reason not to think that UW-Platteville isn't good again. They were great last year. They bring most of those players back. I think this was more of a testament to what Illinois Wesleyan probably does have, and they're a team that's, I think, deserving of a higher look in many of our ballots, mine included. I had them in the teens, and I would be moving them way up, I think, after this weekend. They were really impressive. And it's, again, I don't think it's that UW-Platteville is bad. I think it's just that Illinois Wesleyan is really good. They had home court advantage. They took advantage, and they were great this weekend. They looked great, and they were great.
Number 3, John Carroll gets what looks like a fairly non-remarkable 108-90 win over Albertus Magnus. But Matt, when you look into this one a little bit, that's the reason we wanted to highlight it, is it was an 8-point halftime lead for Albertus Magnus, and then JCU goes on to outscore them 68-42 in the second half, a 68 second half point total for the Blue Streaks.
Yeah, we know John Carroll can get up and down the court when they want to and score in a hurry. They have a lot of weapons. It was interesting to see them trailing at halftime. I think we always knew they would make it a game, but to kind of pull away and make it an impressive margin as it was, I think speaks to John Carroll's ability to score buckets in a hurry like that. I think you had noted some interesting box score elements. John Carroll went to the line more than 50 times in that game, and there's maybe 3 technical fouls assessed to Albertus Magnus. So we weren't able to watch the stream. We don't know all the details there, but perhaps things spiraled on Albertus Magnus a little bit.
A bit of a foul fest. I think
a little bit of a foul fest. Yes.
Total fouls called in the game.
And the Blue Streaks took advantage and really pulled away on that one. But Albertus Magnus, that's a program that is good at best and just plain pesky maybe at worst. But you can't ever take them lightly. It seems like they gave John Carroll a challenge, even though the Blue Streaks were able to pull away into a margin we expected. It looked like this was maybe a heck of a game.
Number 7, Randolph-Macon drops a 81-72 game at Hood, adding to another loss there in the top 10.
Yeah, Hood was a team we're not sure what to make of them from what their team was last year to this year and maybe what they lost or what they're bringing back. But this is an impressive result. And maybe we're not sure exactly what Randolph-Macon is either. So Hood has given Randolph-Macon problems in the past. I think it was 2 seasons ago, a game that Macon ultimately won, but was maybe a double overtime game when Randolph-Macon was also highly ranked in the poll. So really one of these results, you don't know exactly what it means for either side. Obviously a great win for Hood. They really, getting a win like that against Randolph-Macon, no matter where Macon will end up in the poll, I think is impressive for Hood to get the win like that. So definitely key for us to keep an eye on these programs these next few weeks before the top 25 next poll comes out to see where we think that they should both reside in the landscape.
Number 24, Cal Lutheran bounced back for an 81-71 win over number 9, Calvin. And Matt, we talked about Platteville in that championship game against Illinois Wesleyan. And I feel like after that game that Calvin and Platteville played against each other, they came out with pretty similar performances the next day. I don't think that either one necessarily looked tired or worn out, but I don't know if it's just maybe a case of both teams after that battle they had the night before having to play at 85%, where the batteries aren't fully recharged. Maybe it doesn't necessarily show up visibly, but you just have not quite that lift that you have. Both teams struggled to shoot the ball, and it was a 10-point halftime deficit. During the second half, they were kind of spiraled for Calvin. They made it a little bit closer late, but it goes down as an 0-2 weekend for the Knights.
Yeah, definitely a disappointing loss for Calvin. Disappointing to come out 0-2. We knew these were all teams that were in the top 25 poll. These 4 teams all had won their conference championships or a share of their conference championship last year, so it was going to be a tough test. We knew one team was going to come out 0-2 just by definition. Unfortunately, it's our Calvin Knights, and they still have things that they're trying to figure out as they navigate this world without All-American Jalen Overway. And I think on Friday against UW-Platteville, it seemed like it was the best version of that. And then at times against Cal Lutheran, it seemed like there was still a lot of pieces that they weren't quite sure where they were going to fit. It was just interesting to me that you saw Calvin and Platteville play even on Friday. You saw Illinois Wesleyan kind of beat Cal Lutheran by about 10. And then on Saturday, you saw Illinois Wesleyan beat Platteville by 20 and Cal Lutheran beat Calvin by 10. So doing those transitive scores is always a little bit dangerous, but it kind of actually lined up for the weekend if you figure Calvin and Platteville are even and Illinois Wesleyan's at the top, and then maybe Cal Lutheran was 10 points better than that. I don't think that's what the true margins are, but it kind of lined up for the whole weekend as far as who beat who and then who is maybe even with each other. So we're going to have to, I'm glad with these teams and the results that we have 2 more weekends of games to watch before I have to submit a top 25 ballot, because it's really hard to know exactly what's what when you see a weekend like that where there's one close game and kind of 3 maybe games that aren't as close, exactly what to make of that.
Number 11, Trinity, got an 82-81 win over Pacific, a really good win for them over Bethany Lutheran, and then just a 1-point win against Pacific the next day. Another one of those, they got the win, but maybe a little bit of an eyebrow-raising score.
Yeah, we expect Trinity, Texas to be in the mix this year nationally. I think they're ranked in the top 25 poll. I had them, fairly high in my poll, in and around the top 10. So to see them play a game against Pacific on a neutral court, I think we expected them to win by a little bit more. They do get the win, which is ultimately what matters. But we'll have to see if this is if it's just the result of being the second game of a back-to-back and being it a little tighter than they wanted it to be, or if Trinity is still, working through and figuring out what this version of their team is going to be.
Number 12, St. John's hosted UW Oshkosh and got a 73-62 win in, a game for, number 12. It's a high ranking coming into the season for St. John's, but interesting kind of just barometer game maybe with Oshkosh having a disappointing season last year, looking for a bounce back, a little bit more of a return to form for what, we're used to seeing from Oshkosh. 11-point game. They're a little bit interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to sort out the WIAC, see where Oshkosh does fall in that pecking order. For St. John's, I think this just goes down as a solid win, a win that they kind of expected to get by a margin they were hoping to get it by. So just as a measuring stick for them, I think expectations met. It doesn't completely, validate their ranking kind of in the middle of the poll, but it puts them right where they need to be. They're still a program to watch in that kind of Region 9 area. I think this doesn't solidify their position, but it means St. John's is doing what they need to do. Glad to see them in a couple of weeks at the GLI against more good teams, and they're a team I'm still really excited about what they can do this season.
And speaking of the WIAC, UW Eau Claire gets a 68-64 win over number 14 Nebraska Wesleyan.
Yeah, this was surprising to me as we watched the scores to see Eau Claire. I wasn't sure what Eau Claire was going to have this year. They're a team historically the last several seasons has been able to put up pesky battles with other teams that are in the national picture. Didn't know if that was going to be the case with Eau Claire this year or not. But right away against Nebraska Wesleyan, that's an impressive result. So are the Prairie Wolves, I know that they were a team that some top 25 voters were rather high on, some had reservations about. This is maybe a result that shows us maybe we should have some reservations about Nebraska Wesleyan. Are they a team that's going to be able to get those top 25 type results, or are they a complete reassess for where their position is in the top 25?
Speaking of complete reassesses, Matt, here we're kind of getting into that territory. Another one with a top 20 team losing at home, maybe a game that they wish they had back. That's number 20 Maryville losing to Averett 85-79.
Yeah, I think Maryville is a program that wants to compete with the ODACs, but they want to be competing with the top of the ODAC. They don't want to be losing at home to Averett. This is a result that definitely had us questioning Maryville. We saw them have an impressive first half of an exhibition game against a D1, but then here against a D3 in games that count really feels like a disappointing result for the Scots, not really what they wanted, especially on the home court there. I think this is a game, we'll have to see what Averett is. Maybe Averett's a lot better than expected, but this feels, at least right now, like a game that Maryville should have won, needed to win. We know that NPI is going to rule the day when it comes to at-large selection or seeding, whatever Maryville finds their situation in at the end of the year. And losing a game like this is going to be a result that drags down your score and doesn't end up putting it where you want to be. So a team that wants to be in the top 25 in the national picture just really feels like you can't drop a game like this early in the season and keep yourself in the mix like that.
Number 22, NYU got an 86-74 win over Babson. Maybe another one of those kind of barometer games. It seems like a lot of voters didn't know quite what to make of NYU this year. Losing Spencer Friedman is obviously a huge loss for them. Number 22 rankings, shows that maybe some people had him in, a lot of people had him out. But a 12-point win to start the season over the NUMEC favorite seems like a good result for NYU.
Yeah, and I think this was one we had on our radar to watch for that reason. A strong UAA program, the team that the NUMEC coaches, I believe, voted number 1 in their coaches poll. And Babson had been getting some top 25 votes. They weren't ranked, but they had a few poll points. NYU had there at 22. So a strong win for NYU against another good program to show that they're, just because they lost the National Player of the Year, Spencer Friedman, doesn't mean that they're going to be out of the mix at all. I think their pole position is fair right now, but they're going to be maybe looking to rise. And I think a game like this win over Babson, combined with maybe some other questionable results that we're already seeing this weekend in the top 25, is maybe going to have NYU, should they keep these results going for the next couple of weeks, poised to move up in the top 25 poll.
And the team right behind them, number 23, Hampton-Sydney, the defending national runner-up. It's a really impressive 81-64 win at Swarthmore. Matt, for a Hampton-Sydney team, that did suffer some losses from a season ago. Obviously a lot of people weren't quite sure what to make of them coming into the season, ranked just number 23. You go in and get a win at SWAT, that's a good result. Then you look at, a 17-point margin, and, that's one of those positive eyebrow raisers.
Yeah, and we talked about Maryville being a reassess for me in the top 25 poll. I think Hampton-Sydney, with this result, is immediately a reassess for me as well. I did not rank them. I considered them a watch list team just because there was a lot of moving parts, players kind of graduating out of that program. They do have pieces back, and maybe I didn't value that as highly as I should. Maybe I got just scared off by some of the returning percentage and minutes and points scored and things like that. But to beat a solid program like Swarthmore, not a team that I had voted in the top 25 either, but by a solid margin on the road, I think I need to reassess Hampton-Sydney back up. Again, still a couple of weeks to go before we actually have to submit a top 25 ballot. But for me, right now in the early going, they're a team that I am now regretting not including in my top 25.
And then Saturday saw just one other game in the top 25. Matt, taking care of business was Christopher Newport with a 78-61 win over Greensboro. Okay, so we've made mention a couple of times along the way here how maybe this impacts your top 25 outlook for your ballot. It is a couple weeks until there is the next top 25 poll. But, just to highlight, you made a couple mentions here. There's been a couple results that we've seen so far between Friday and Saturday that are kind of immediate reassess type results. You don't want to completely blow up your top 25 based on, just seeing one or two games, especially when that's, among ranked teams. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and, how they look matters too. But you don't want to make overreactions. But, as a voter, you want to be as accurate as possible. You don't want to underreact. So let's talk about some of those results that are just, cause you to immediately assess them in the picture. We've talked about Maryville, the game that they dropped, Hope, the game that they dropped, and then on the other end, Hampton-Sydney with what they were able to do at Swarthmore.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. Those are the teams I'd be looking immediately to change my opinion on, or at least my intermediate opinion on, as we have a few weeks before the second ballots go in. Maybe another team I would throw into that mix is Nebraska Wesleyan. Usually it's the teams that are in my last, 5, 6, 7 spots that I wasn't quite sure of who to put in there. And when you drop a game versus an unranked, especially if it was a home game, like we saw with Hope and we saw with Maryville, a home game loss to an unranked, I think that's kind of like, I think maybe those teams for me are falling out of the poll right now, and I'm looking for another team to pull in. Seems like definitely that's going to be Hampton-Sydney. Well, I say definitely, right? But we're sitting here on Sunday morning of the opening weekend. So there's still a lot to go. But I like to try to keep these things in my mind as I'm shuffling teams around and we go to the next poll, just so I know which teams I should be looking out for and which teams are definitely more on like the wait and see. I think that's Maryville. I think that's Hope, and that's maybe Nebraska Wesleyan right now. I'm not quite sure.
And as you're filling out a ballot, I'm sure there's a whole group of teams that you feel pretty similarly about, and as you get towards the bottom of that top 25, the nods went to it, maybe a Hope or a Maryville, but after a result like that, you got another team that you feel similarly about heading into the season. It's like, okay, well, for the time being, maybe it's time to give someone else a shot at that spot. Not to say either one of those teams won't be or can't be top 25 teams or work their way back into the mix. It's just the type of result that you would hope that a top 25 team would avoid.
Yeah.
And so there's so much depth, it seems, in the Division III basketball landscape, that there are always a similar group of teams that it makes it easy to slot in for at least the next poll. All right, at the other end, Matt, let's talk about the teams that you're feeling strong or stronger about. I know you had a top 5 or 6 that you felt pretty good at the top of your ballot as you're filling out your preseason ballot. Again, not to overreact or underreact, but maybe what does that feel like having seen a couple days of games?
Yeah, to try to avoid the too much early season overreaction, but I have UW Platteville right away at number 1 on my ballot. If I had to resubmit on Sunday morning, I would move them down. I don't know exactly where right now, but they would not be number 1. They would not be number 2. They wouldn't be in that top 5 zone right now for me. I think my immediate reaction would be to move Trine up to number 1. I think that they've shown some strong results. They're the defending national champion. I would be okay with them being right up there at number 1. I think a team that moves into that mix for me after maybe the most impressive weekend of anyone in the country would be Illinois Wesleyan, what they were able to do against Cal Lutheran and UW Platteville. That they look like a top team. I think I would put them in the top 4, probably somewhere around number 2, not exactly sure. And then a couple of other teams that might stay in that mix for me would be maybe John Carroll, and I think Christopher Newport is up in that zone as well. And probably Wash U. Yeah, Wash U had the good win against Rhodes, so I don't think I would move them, where they were. So I don't know the exact order. I think that would be my top 4 or 5 right now. We haven't seen the NESCACs, and I think my number 6 was Trinity, Connecticut. So I don't really have a reason to reassess them right now. So I think that would be kind of who would be up at the top of my ballot in some order. The teams that I'm looking for that until they prove that they don't belong there, probably stay there for me.
So we'll continue driving home. We'll get home, Matt, put together the rest of the episode. We'll review last week's picks. We'll do the new picks. We'll hopefully have some mailbag and finish this one out.
Yeah, as this is Sunday morning, I'm excited to look silly already come Sunday night when we finish the show and wrap up the episode.
We both made it home to our respective home bases, and we have Sunday results to talk about. So we thought we'd go through, similarly like we talked about Friday and Saturday games, in part because, there's some more things to talk about, but also because I think we can add maybe a little bit of additional color to some of the things we talked about from what we saw earlier this weekend. So Matt, 3 games in particular to highlight from Sunday. Number 8, Emory gets a 20-point win, 91-71 over Barry.
Yeah, that just talking right off the bat on that one, that's an impressive result for Emory. I know Barry has a coaching change, some roster turnovers. Maybe they're not quite the team they were a year ago, but still, that's a 20-point victory for Emory. That's impressive nonetheless. I think a lot of us had Emory high in our poll, and this is just another example that maybe that looks correct right now.
And we talked about number 14, Nebraska Wesleyan dropping their opener, but it was a good bounce back performance for them. The Prairie Wolves get an 82-73 win over UW La Crosse on Sunday.
Yeah, and my overreaction when we were talking in the car was that maybe Nebraska Wesleyan would deserve a full reassess right now. I'm not entirely sure that's not true, but to see them turn around and win a game against UW La Crosse, another WIAC team, win this game by 9. I think they were ahead. I followed a lot of the second half. It seemed like they were ahead by about 10 a lot of the way. So a pretty impressive win from Nebraska Wesleyan, at least what they wanted to do, what they wanted to be here at this point in the year is to beat a team like UW La Crosse and to beat them by a fairly good margin here.
We talked about number 22 NYU earlier. They played again on Sunday, getting a 102-78 win over Rowan. I know Rowan has some turnover, but they seem to be one of those programs that's always in the mix for some transfers and able to reload. Have had a lot of success. So seeing a margin like that is particularly impressive for NYU. I know you were higher on them on your ballot than what they ended up with their number 22 ranking.
Yeah, Rowan is for sure always a team that we're keeping our eye on in the NJAC. They're a program that deserves attention. So for NYU to win 102-78 against Rowan, that speaks well of NYU, I think. So now they have a pretty solid, I think, 12-point win over Babson, and now, like, what is this, a 24-point win over Rowan. NYU looks good. I think they're definitely deserving of a top 25 inclusion here. So we've got a couple of data points for NYU that I think shows that life after Spencer Friedman is going to probably be okay for the Violets.
And then two more top five teams, Matt, that we can just say took care of business. John Carroll, the third ranked team in the preseason poll, got a 68-49 win over Penn State Harrisburg. And fifth ranked Christopher Newport with an 85-77 win over North Carolina Wesleyan.
All right, Zach, with some of the weekend recap out of the way, let's continue on recapping our own part of this, which is our silly little picks game. We had 5 games on the slate for week 1. Our efficiency ratings computer sets up a fake line, and we pick against the line. So running down the recap, the first game that we had on the slate was Bethany Lutheran against Trinity, Texas. The computer had Trinity as 3-point favorites. They won by 17. We both picked Trinity, Zach, so we both get the point. Game 2 was Eastern. They were 1.5 underdogs versus Roanoke. They won the game outright by 2, so Eastern wins, and we both miss, Zach. Game number 3 was Hampton-Sydney. They were 3-point favorites on the road at Swarthmore. We wanted to go with the home team here. Both you and I picked the same way once again. And look, 2 out of the 3 first games, we are wrong. Hampton-Sydney wins that game huge. We talked a little bit about that one earlier. So Hampton-Sydney is correct. Neither of us get the point. Game number 4 was Mary Hardin-Baylor. 1.5 underdogs versus Heidelberg in a game played at Trine. Mary Hardin-Baylor wins that game outright by 4. Zach, you get that pick. I missed the pick, so I am struggling to start the season. And our D3 Datacast game of the week was a double heartbreaker for all of us. Calvin falls by 1. The computer had them as 1-point favorites. We both went the direction of the Calvin Knights. This pick looked good with about a minute and a half to play, but UW-Platteville pulls it out, so we both missed that one. The week 1 recap, Zach, you go 2-3. I go 1-4, so I'm starting out trailing you. That's how I finished last year. But I think both of us are going to want to improve upon these results as the season goes on. So let's take a look at what we're picking against this week. I'm going to read down the list, and then we'll go back and make our picks. The first game is Clark. They're 11-point underdogs at St. Joseph, Connecticut. St. Thomas, Texas is 0.5-point favorites at Hardin-Simmons. Mary Washington is 2.5-point favorites versus Maryville. Keene State is 5.5-point favorites at Western New England. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week is a non-conference matchup between 2 conference rivals. Randolph-Macon, 3.5-point underdogs on the road at Hampton-Sydney. So this is the slate, Zach. It's customary for you to go first. So we're going back up to the top with Clark and St. Joseph. Who do you like against that computer line?
I'm going to make this one really easy, and an 11-point spread there feels just too big for 2 programs that I think well of. So just looking at the number, I'm going to take all 11 of those points and go with Clark.
Yeah, I think you and I are thinking the same way. We thought the same way a lot last week, and we thought wrong a lot last week. But I think that's too big of a margin. These are both programs that we are interested in seeing this year, but I think 11 points is too big of a spread right now. St. Thomas, Texas, 0.5-point favorites against Hardin-Simmons. Your pick, Zach.
I'm going to go with Hardin-Simmons here. I'm not doing that with a ton of conviction, but I'll take the home team in basically a pick'em game. But we'll see. I'm really not sure after what we've seen in the first weekend what to expect out of the ASC. I'm not sure what to expect out of St. Thomas either, but close game here. I'll take the home team.
That's one of the fun things about the early season is we talk about what we think we know, but we don't really know anything. Our whole recap of the first weekend is surprising results. But you're right, 0.5-point line. We're basically picking the straight up winner. I'm going to go opposite of you, and I'm going to pick St. Thomas, Texas. On the road, I think they can pull up the victory here. Straight up to win, we'll cover that line. Third one here, Mary Washington, 2.5 points against Maryville. This is a neutral site game. Your pick.
This one was tough. I had to give a lot of thought to it. Ultimately, I decided I'm not gonna get too spooked over the Averett game just yet, so I'm gonna go with Maryville.
All right, Zach, this is going to be another one that we're going to go opposite directions as I'm going to pick Mary Washington. I am going to get a little bit spooked by that early season result for Maryville, and I'm going to think that Mary Washington is going to carry this one. Even though they're 3.5 or 2.5 point favorites, I think they can win by that 3 or more and cover the line. Keene State is a big name in Region 2, but they're going up against Western New England, 5.5 point favorites. Is that too big of a line for you, Zach, or are you going to go with Keene State?
It was getting to be there, but I don't know. I'm optimistic that maybe the drop off from Keene State, if there is any drop off, is maybe not as severe as could have been. So I'm gonna go with the Owls.
All right, Zach, I'm going to go the same way. I thought about this one for a long time because Western New England is a team out of the CNE that I'm keeping my eye on this year, but I think Keene State just has too much power. That program has been strong. It's kind of like when is Keene State going to drop off? Well, they're going to have to prove it to me before I start counting against the Owls. So I will go with Keene State as well. And then down in Virginia, we have a big Region 6 rivalry. Randolph-Macon, 3.5 point underdogs on the road at Hampton-Sydney. Your pick.
Yeah, I said I wasn't gonna get spooked by a bad result from Maryville, and maybe I'm allowing myself to get a little too spooked with Randolph-Macon dropping a game, but Hampton-Sydney has been impressive so far. And so with 3.5 points there at Hampton City, we're kind of in the range of the difference being just the home court advantage. Um, but I feel if we're in reassess territory here after the opening weekend, I think we have to bump Hampton Sydney up a little bit. So I'll go with the Tigers.
Yeah, in reassess mode, I'm going to try not to overreact too much early either. I did not vote for Hampton City in my top 25, and I had Randolph Macon in the top 10 only after one weekend of results. I'm going to maybe flip my opinion on those two teams, maybe. I'm going to pick Hampton Sydney to cover that 3.5 point line at home. I'm impressed with what Hampton Sydney's doing so far this season. I think I was too quick to discount a few of the key losses they had on that team. I think they still have a ton left. I think that's still a good program. I probably did not give that enough credit in the preseason. So I'm going to pick Hampton Sydney here to win this game and cover the spread against Randolph-Macon. That brings us back to our kind of our quote unquote upset watch section. This year, we're not doing it the same way we had done in the past. We're going to talk about some games or some teams in interesting ways. So, Zach, what's our upset watch here this week?
Yeah, again, from last week, we decided we would kind of reframe Upset Watch to be taking a look at some of the more interesting ranked versus unranked matchups of the week. And we have a few to talk about here, Matt. We're going to start with number 5, Christopher Newport playing Virginia Wesleyan.
Yeah, this one's interesting. Christopher Newport has beaten Greensboro by 17. They beat NC Wesleyan by 8. That's really no problems for a team that we have in the top 25 there. I think those are expected results. Virginia Wesleyan, though, they beat Ripon by 43 points. They beat Mary Washington by 17. It's early in the season. We don't know how good anyone is really at this point, but those are big margins from Virginia Wesleyan. And although I said Christopher Newport hasn't done anything to make us doubt them, I think this makes it an interesting game. This is always Virginia Wesleyan is always a team that's kind of in that mix in the top of the ODAC. Christopher Newport is a team that's very strong in Virginia that's going to go in deep into tournaments. This is a great game to watch. This is one that Virginia Wesleyan could win, and I think this is at Virginia Wesleyan, I believe, in sort of their like across the bridge rivalry there. So this is a game. Watch out for the Marlins, I think.
And our other one here, Matt, is Brockport taking on number 19 Mount Union. Of course, Mount Union has already suffered a loss. They lost a home game to Yeshiva. Brockport took a 2-point loss to Case Western Reserve. Remains to be seen what Case is like this year, if they've been able to successfully reload as they have the last couple years. But, a close game there, maybe an underperformance from Mount Union in their opener. And, again, maybe at this point with Mount Union already suffering a loss, maybe this isn't, an upset, but still with a ranked, unranked type matchup here, this looks like another good one to watch.
Yeah, really tough with no new poll this week to pick what ranked team might fall because we've already seen a bunch of the ranked team falls ranked teams fall. But yeah, this is definitely an interesting one for those reasons that you said. Brockport's 1-1. They beat SUNY Canton, which is fine. But that 2-point defeat at Case Western Reserve is kind of one of those quote unquote good losses, maybe, if Case is as good as they've been those last couple of seasons. So I think Brockport's a team to watch this year, and this game against Mount Union could be particularly interesting to see how Brockport is on the national map.
And then not just one game here to look at with number 20 Maryville. We've talked a lot about them so far here, but just an interesting opportunity I think is in front of them this week. We've talked about the loss that they suffered opening weekend to Averett and how maybe voters might look at that as a game that a team who is in their top 25 mix shouldn't be losing. By the time we got a couple more weeks before the next poll comes out, so Maryville certainly has some interesting opportunities, in particular, I think this week, to make the case that that was more of an aberration and that they truly are a rankable team, right? By the time that we actually get to that next ballot. So, hey, if they can run the table through this week, I think they can make their case. We'll see. Maybe voters don't, ultimately keep them in the top 25, but this would be an opportunity for them to make their case to establish themselves as at least a rankable team, whatever that mix for voters is, whether just inside or outside on like a watch list type thing. November 13th, they'll take on Sewanee. Then they head to Marietta for the tournament there with a game against Mary Washington. And then hope, depending on what happens, of course, in the context we're talking about, we'd be, Maryville should be looking, if they're making that case that they truly are a rankable team at this point, to beat Mary Washington and then to take on the winner of Marietta and UW Eau Claire.
Yeah, definitely the types of games that Maryville wants to win if they're going to be continuing to be in this top 25 picture. Can't lose too many of those games throughout the season and still say, hey, we deserve to be in the national mix. They already lost one to Averett. Maybe Averett's great. We don't, like we said, we don't know who everyone else is. But again, you're going to want to beat Sewanee. That's a team that the SAA coaches voted at the top of that coaches poll. You're going to want to beat Mary Washington, a very strong team, a team that we had seen in the regional ranking mix that had kind of maybe pushed Maryville out of the regional ranking mix in that old season, or the old system that we have kind of going out. And then Marietta, of course, a Great Lakes kind of power, UW Eau Claire, a team from the WIAC. These are games that can help keep Maryville on the map or put them back onto the map if they have fallen out on the road for the voters. So with already one loss down, really need to kind of look at winning these games, maybe running the table this week to stay in voters' minds and put them back in that rankable category, as you said, Zach. So that's Upset Watch.
There we go. Should be some good ones to watch. All right, Matt, this is the portion of the show where we would do the mailbag. Nothing to cover in the mailbag this week. If any viewers out there have something that you'd like for us to address, you can leave a comment on our YouTube episode here. You can get with us on social media. Lots of ways to get a hold of us. We'd love to address anything, any burning topics that you may have in a future mailbag.
And we'd like to once again thank our Patreon supporters. They help us to produce these episodes, to keep d3datacast.com ad-free, and to help us to hit the road and be able to attend high-profile tournaments like the Jack Sigma Invitational at Illinois Wesleyan and the Final Four at the end of the season. So thanks for everyone who has been able to support our D3 data endeavors and this show in particular. We appreciate all of you.
Lots more great action this week, Matt. Looking forward to seeing how it plays out. We'll be back with another show next Monday morning, as we will each and every week during the basketball season here. One more thing, Matt.
Great job, team.
Good job, team.